Welcome to the Hair Cafe News Network, the world's finest source for hair loss news, pop culture, and politics. So it is Election Day in America, which means it is time for me to use my powers of Witcher clairvoyance and give my prognostication for this year's presidential election. A lot of my fellow hair loss witchers in the United States have already voted, and at this point, anyone who says they're undecided is probably bullshitting themselves, let's be completely honest. Now, I know what some of you are thinking right now, but Kevin, what the hell are you doing talking about politics? The channel is called Hair Cafe, not Politics Cafe. Indeed, you are right on that one, chums. This is not a channel for political content, and my channel is indeed a safe space for anyone who is interested in learning more about hair loss so that they can better defeat the slaphead curse. That being said, it has become somewhat of a small tradition on this channel for me to make a prediction video on the US presidential election. I made one on this channel the last election in 2020, and my prediction was nearly perfect. I predicted that Joe Biden would win the presidential election by carrying all the states that Hillary Clinton won in 2016, but also that he would carry the Rust Belt by winning Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and thus effectively rebuild the blue Democratic wall. The only states I got wrong were Georgia and Arizona, which I predicted would go to Trump like they did in 2012 and 2008 for that matter. So Biden ended up winning by an even bigger margin than I predicted, but overall I think I came pretty close, which I think gives me at least some credibility as a political analyst. So, before I give my prediction, I think it is only fair that I do disclose my own political biases and briefly explain who I am going to vote for and why. So, I have never voted for Trump. I voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, Biden in 2020, and I have already voted for Kamala Harris in 2024 here in the state of Colorado. So you may be thinking, holy shit, fuck this lefty, I'm unsubscribing right now. And even though my political views do overall lean to the left and I am a registered Democrat, I do have some conservative views as well, especially when it comes to the issues of crime and immigration. So I'm not completely opposed to the idea of voting Republican. In fact, I have voted Republican a couple times in the past, like for Governor Bill Owens in 2002, who was the governor of Colorado, which, like I said, is the state I live in. But in today's political climate, I definitely cannot support the Republican Party in its current state, and I would not consider doing so long as the MAGA ideology continues to be the dominant force of the GOP. But is there anything I actually like about Trump? Well, yeah, he's pretty entertaining. I mean, his tweets are very fun to read. The guy's an outstanding troll, and he's a good entertainer as well. The show The Apprentice was very fun to watch back in the day, and it's worth mentioning that his wife is very hot, and I'd definitely sleep with his daughter too. Not Tiffany, of course, the hot one, Ivanka. I'd definitely sleep with her, and that's one thing Trump and I actually agree on. But when it comes to Donald Trump, the candidate, not Donald Trump, the entertainer, he's far too flawed of a candidate for me to even consider voting for. And I think there's a lot of issues, a lot of red flags that I have with the guy. But I think in recent months, what a lot of people have been noticing is a severe cognitive decline. I remember, this was talked a lot about in the mainstream media and also on social media, but he was talking about Arnold Palmer. Apparently he had a friendship with him. He used to play golf with him. And he talked about his experience showering with the guy, of all things he could have talked about. That's what he decided to talk about. And he was very descriptive for several minutes, talking about the size of Arnold Palmer's John Thomas, and this was apparently very offensive to the surviving family of Arnold Palmer. But whatever you think about it, you can say maybe he was joking, but it was just a weird thing for a presidential candidate to bring up, and it makes me think that he doesn't have the mental fitness to be president. And if it was just that one thing, then that would have been fine, but he's been doing other weird things as well. Like, I remember he was at an economic forum, and he was talking to some economists, and he was asked some very basic economic questions and business questions, like he was asked about Google's breakup, and then he just suddenly shifted the topic to his conversation about election policy with Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, and it had nothing to do with the question at all. And he was even asked about it again, and they just dodged it, and he said he was like weaving or something. So even if he's like mentally fit, he doesn't really have the competence to discuss policy in a way that you'd expect from somebody who wants to be president of the United States. And that's despite him having been president of the United States for 4 years, and you'd expect him to have the experience to be able to answer questions like that. In addition to his lack of mental fitness and lack of competence, I also think Donald Trump doesn't really have the humility to be president. And what I mean by that is that Donald Trump is not somebody who likes to be told no under any circumstances. But when you're in any professional field, your work has to be peer reviewed. You have to have people who are around you who are willing to like give you their opinion and tell you when they think you're wrong. I mean, maybe you're right, but it's good to have like your policies fact checked and discussed and debated. But Donald Trump doesn't like to be told he's wrong under any circumstances, and that's why he fired a lot of his old cabinet members like Jeff Sessions during his first term. So I think he regretted making a lot of appointments. I think he regrets his vice president even, Mike Pence. That's why he like said that, oh, Mike Pence betrayed the country because he did certify the election. So I think this time he's going to appoint himself with complete sycophants, and they're going to let him do whatever he wants and never question anything he does. But Kamala Harris, on the other hand, I think she's somebody who is willing to admit when she's wrong. And she's even said recently that she's going to appoint a Republican to her cabinet. I think that's fantastic. She should appoint Republicans to her cabinet because, you know, what she and Joe Biden, her potential predecessor, has said many times is that their cabinet, their administration should look like America. And, you know, that's why Biden appointed the first black female to the Supreme Court. But if you want your administration to look like America, that means you should also include Republicans, because there's a lot of Republicans in this country as well, and they deserve a representation in your administration, even if you're a Democrat. And that's why I really like that Kamala Harris is thinking about people who maybe won't vote for her. Donald Trump, on the other hand, he thinks that people who don't support him, don't vote for him, are absolute scum, and he's not going to try to be a good president for anyone except for the people who support him 100%. And I think Kamala Harris is going to try to unite the country, both Democrats and Republicans, and that's why she has a lot of Republicans who are supporting her, like Jeff Flake from Arizona has endorsed her, and of course there's like Liz Cheney. I mean, I think there's a growing anti-MAGA wing of the Republican Party that is becoming more favorable to Kamala Harris as a person, not necessarily because of her policies, but more because they think that it's time to move on from the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, and there needs to be some Republicans around who will help rebuild the Republican Party after the MAGA movement has collapsed and disintegrated into dust. In addition to that, I think the reason why a lot of Republicans are supporting Kamala Harris is because I think they're worried about the solvency of our nation's democratic institutions if somebody like Trump is allowed to hold power again. Because I think that being that Trump wants to appoint basically a bunch of yes men, being that he has the Supreme Court under his thrall, he's appointed 3 of the 9 justices at this point, and being that they've also said that he has complete presidential immunity, I'm worried that if Trump gets elected, the USA will just become Trump's kingdom where he can do whatever he wants. And I really think that he is motivated to run not out of a sense of patriotism or doing what's best for his country. I think he's running just to save his own ass from legal jeopardy. I mean, the guy's a convicted criminal, and I prefer the prosecutor over the crook. I mean, that's just me, sorry. And moving past like the character of each candidate, I also don't really care about the policies of Donald Trump. Now, I'm not going to go over every single policy point by point. That would just take too long, and I still need to give a prediction after all in this channel. But when Republicans talk about the issues that are most important to them, with maybe a couple exceptions, pretty much nothing they talk about matters to me. And it seems that the issues that right-wingers prioritize above everything else are issues that don't matter to people who have a life outside of social media. I'm talking about all the culture war bullshit they always talk about. Things like trans athletes, minority characters in Disney movies, black characters playing samurais in video games, or they're mad about an interracial couple in the Fallout TV show, or some gay character in the latest Dragon Age game. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't think any of that stuff is cringy. I think it is cringy a lot of times because it feels like pandering, but what a lot of these neckbeards are forgetting is that there is no political solution for any of this. The reason why these producers, these writers keep on making these woke video games, TV shows, and movies is because they have a First Amendment right to do so. So if you really want to stop seeing these things being produced, the best solution is to use your influence as a consumer and stop buying this crap. So if you don't like it, don't buy it. So of course Trump has outlined many policies, which I don't have time to go over all of them, but it seems that the common theme is that every single problem in America can be solved if we just solve our immigration problem. And don't get me wrong, I definitely am in favor of enforcing our laws and securing our borders, but Trump thinks we need to militarize our border practically, as well as build a giant wall. And last time he said that Mexico was going to build the wall and Mexico was going to pay for it, but of course that's not going to happen. He's not making any pretense that can happen this time. So how is he going to build a wall and militarize our border this time? Well, he says he's going to do so through tariff taxes, and tariff taxes are just completely stupid. Let's be totally honest here. It's just going to make the cost of living higher for most Americans, and it's going to make our exports more expensive as well, since countries will no doubt impose retaliatory tariffs on American goods. It's a terrible idea. The whole concept is completely outdated. We live in a global economy, and the era of protectionism is over. Get over it. And also, as someone who drives two electric cars, I have to say I don't like how he's politicized electric cars and talks shit about them all the time. I mean, I remember at the convention he said something like, oh, an electric car can only last like 45 minutes per charge. I mean, that's not true. I mean, even my Kia EV6 GT, which is considered to have lower range than a lot of other electric cars, if I'm driving in eco mode, I can still easily get like 250 miles per charge, and I've never gotten range anxiety. And frankly, I don't even know what the price of gas is. I mean, I also drive a hybrid. I also have a 2023 Toyota Prius, but I barely ever drive it. That's what my girlfriend drives mostly. So I almost never buy gas anymore, and I think it's fantastic. So there's a lot of benefits to having electric cars. You know, if people don't want to buy an electric car, that's fine. But you know, there's no reason why we need to like politicize them and make them part of the cringy culture war. There's already enough things that are getting politicized. We don't need to politicize electric vehicles. Also, another thing that I think is worth mentioning is that literally every anti-finasteride person I have ever interacted with is a Trump-supporting internet tough guy. I don't know why that is exactly. I mean, maybe it's because conspiracy theories are popular on the right. I mean, after all, we're talking about a party where the majority of voters believe in the QAnon conspiracy theory, and they don't even accept the fact that Joe Biden handily won the election in 2020. Even their leader, Donald Trump, is someone who first became popular politically by claiming that Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. So I don't want to empower any political party that thinks that finasteride is some nefarious plot by Jewish lizard people from Proxima Centauri to feminize men and promote the Great Replacement theory. The European Union already has enough problems with politicians trying to ban finasteride as it is, and I made several videos about that already, and I definitely don't want any of that shit in the USA. And yes, I know the EU is full of lefties, and if I lived in Europe, I probably would be more inclined to vote conservative, as there are a lot of conservative politicians in Europe that I like. But here in the United States, it is the right-wingers who are the conspiracy theorists, and that really bothers me. So even though I'm going to be voting for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, that doesn't necessarily mean that I think she is going to win. I mean, there's a lot of things to consider in this election about who could win and who has the advantage. I mean, if you look at the polls, it shows that Donald Trump does have a small but consistent lead in most of the swing states, while Kamala Harris has a lead in the national vote. But of course, the national vote doesn't matter in the United States because we elect candidates based on electoral vote majorities. So that's why Donald Trump won in 2016, even though Hillary Clinton got like 2 to 3 million more votes than he did. So there's other things to consider as well. I mean, there's Gen Z turnout, because I've heard that a lot of people who are listed as likely voters are people who weren't eligible to vote in 2022 but now are. So we're talking about a new wave of younger voters who will be voting who never voted before, and they may be more inclined to vote for Kamala Harris, especially the women, because they may be pissed off about the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade and returned abortion to the state, the legality of abortion to the state. And in addition to the influx of Gen Z voters who are more likely to vote for Kamala Harris, there's going to be far fewer boomers, which is a demographic which usually favors conservative candidates, especially Donald Trump. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, you know, many of them have died of natural causes, but also a lot of them died because of COVID, because COVID was a highly politicized issue. Because, you know, COVID was politicized much in the same way that Donald Trump is trying to politicize electric cars, but because of that, it cost a lot of people their lives. I mean, right-wing influencers like Candace Owens, who rallied hard against the vaccines, she probably killed more boomers than the Vietnam War. And as a consequence of that could very well cost Trump the election, and that could be the reason why Republicans underperformed in the 2022 election, which was a midterm election where the media was reporting that as a big red wave, but as it turns out, that red wave didn't really materialize, and Democrats did a lot better than people expected. And it looks like we also have an October surprise this year, where former Chief of Staff John Kelly said that Trump said he wished he had Hitler's generals. Apparently, Trump also said that it shouldn't cost $60,000 to bury a, quote, fucking Mexican, unquote. Now, there's no definitive proof he said any of that, but I tend to believe a 4-star general over a convicted felon, so just take from that what you will. Oh, and it also looks like Trump decided to hold this Nazi-esque rally in Madison Square Garden, where he invited a bunch of idiots to speak, including some asshole who insulted blacks and Puerto Ricans. I know Trump himself didn't make the remarks, but these speeches are scripted and read out on teleprompters, so obviously either Trump or someone in his campaign approved of this. So definitely a boneheaded move by the Trump administration, and it will probably hurt him in the Rust Belt states like Pennsylvania and Michigan that have a sizable Puerto Rican population. But anyways, let me go ahead and outline how each state I think is going to vote in this election. And the way I'm going to do that is much similar to what I did in 2020, because there's this very cool website called 270towin.com. So let me go ahead and just open this website and tell you what I'm going to do. Okay, so here is the Electoral College map. of the 2024 presidential election. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a blank map. Let's go ahead and use a blank canvas, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill in all the states that are safe Democratic and safe Republican. So I'm talking about the states where there's pretty much no chance of them voting for the party they usually vote for. So let's start with the safe Republican seats. Okay, Idaho, definitely. Idaho has good potatoes, but they have bad politicians. And Wyoming, I'll tell you one thing about Wyoming though, is that if you ever want to go stargazing down there, that's a great place if you have a telescope, if you're interested in astronomy like I am. I mean, there's no light pollution there, so you can probably see the Triangulum Galaxy if you wanted to. So there's also Utah, heavy Mormon population, but Mormons, I don't think they like Trump's personal conduct, but they're still not going to vote for a Democrat under any circumstances in this election, at least. And let's see, Oklahoma, very, very evangelical state. I think they like Trump's policies on abortion, so no chance they're going to vote for Kamala Harris, who is pro-choice. Kansas went a little bit more left than it usually does in 2020, but again, not going to happen. Now, Nebraska is interesting. Nebraska actually splits their electoral vote based on districts. So there is one competitive district, and it's the 2nd Congressional District, which I'm going to go ahead and leave as blank for now. It's a swing district, but it represents Omaha, which is a city in Nebraska, and that's kind of like a moderate district. Now, Barack Obama lost that district in 2012, but I should say, well, he did lose it, but also Hillary Clinton lost that district in 2016, but Joe Biden won that district in 2020. It's worth one electoral vote, so it's called the blue dot sometimes, and Maine has their own version of it as well, and we'll get to that soon. So the Dakotas are definitely not going Democratic under any circumstances. Iowa used to be a swing state, not anymore. The last time I voted for a Democrat was Barack Obama in 2012. Same thing with Missouri. It used to be a swing state. It hasn't voted Democratic since 1996. Arkansas, Bill Clinton's home state, but very, very conservative. Louisiana used to be a little bit more competitive. It had a higher African-American population, but then unfortunately Hurricane Katrina basically ethnically cleansed the state, so now it's as white bread as you can get. Very, very conservative, very right-wing. And then you have Mississippi, Alabama, not Georgia. We'll get to that soon, but that's actually different from the other states in the Deep South. Same thing with North Carolina. And then you have South Carolina, which is safe red. And then Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana surprisingly voted for Barack Obama in 2008. I have no idea how that happened, because Indiana is as white bread as you can get, yet somehow he won it. West Virginia, probably the most conservative state in the country, either West Virginia or Wyoming, but it used to be a Democratic stronghold, but now it is firmly in the Republican column. So let's see what else I'm missing here. You know what? I'm going to put Alaska as safe red as well. I mean, they did elect a Democratic congresswoman at large, Mary Peltola, and it's possible, and I think it's even probable, that it will vote for Trump by single-digit margins, but I don't think there's any way it's actually going Democratic this year. And of course, Montana as well. Montana, interestingly enough, got another electoral vote. It used to be worth 3, now it's worth 4. And let me just double check. Oh yeah, Ohio, that's another safe red state. It used to be a battleground state. I remember John Kerry losing that in 2004 was the deciding state that cost him the election. And let me go ahead and just take another scan, make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh yeah, Florida, of course. Florida, the 2nd largest electoral prize for Republicans. Now Texas, actually, I am not going to. I'm not going to say that's safe red. I know a lot of people disagree with me, and I think it's very likely that Trump's going to win that state, but I'm not going to list it as safe red. Florida, on the other hand, I mean, if you guys remember 2022. In 2022, Florida was one of the few states where the red wave actually did materialize. Marco Rubio got reelected overwhelmingly. Ron DeSantis beat his Democratic opponent by double-digit margins. There's no way in hell it's going Democratic this year. And also the Senate candidate is going to lose in that state. So let me just double-check. I think I got everything as far as the safe red states go. I did. So let's go for the safe blue states. And after I film the safe blue states, that will leave us with just the competitive states in this election. So California, safe blue, even though it's Ronald Reagan's home state. Oregon, that's where the Goonies are from, blue state. Washington, very blue state. Let me see. We also have New Mexico is a blue state. And obviously, Colorado is a safe blue state now. I mean, Joe Biden won that state by over 13 percentage points. And I don't think there's any way that Donald Trump is winning Colorado this year. I mean, this is my home state, of course. And, there's some conservative areas like Colorado Springs and, Bullitt County, as well as Douglas County. But if you look at like Denver and Boulder, I mean, it feels like more liberal than Vermont. So speaking of, since I said that, let's go ahead and fill in Vermont as a safe blue state as well. And let's see what else we got here. Illinois, that's where Chicago is. It would probably be a pretty conservative state otherwise. Virginia, it's interesting. This is considered a southern state, but it's still a pretty safe blue state. I mean, they did elect Glenn Youngkin a few years ago. But he's not a very popular governor apparently, and I don't think it's going to go for Trump this year. I think Joe Biden won it by double digits, like 11 points, and I don't think Donald Trump has a chance of making up that deficit. So let's see, New York blue, Massachusetts blue. That's where the Kennedys are from. Let's see, Connecticut blue, of course. Rhode Island, one of the bluest states in the country. New Jersey blue. Delaware, it's Joe Biden's home state. Maryland, I think it went like 30 points for Joe Biden last time. District of Columbia, not a state, but overwhelmingly Democratic. I mean, expected to go at least 90% for Kamala Harris. No chance. No Republican has ever won the District of Columbia. Not even Ronald Reagan in his 1984 landslide win against Walter Mondale. So also we have Maine. Now Maine is like Nebraska, where it's a blue state, but its second congressional district is a toss-up. Donald Trump did win it in 2020. He also won in 2016, so he got one electoral vote from New England. And also New Hampshire, I'm going to go ahead and list that as a safe blue state as well, even though it is more conservative than the surrounding states. Joe Biden still won that pretty comfortably by about 8 points, and the polls look like Kamala Harris is going to win it by about the same margin. But even if she underperforms, I don't think there's any way that Donald Trump is going to win New Hampshire this year. So that leaves us with the swing states, or these competitive states this year. Oh shit, I forgot Hawaii. Sorry, my apologies to anyone from Hawaii. I didn't mean to neglect your state, but it's probably the most Democratic state in the country. Either that or Vermont. Very, very blue states. No chance that's going for Donald Trump this year. Okay, so now we are officially left with the competitive states. So first one I want to talk about is Minnesota. Now, the only reason I'm listing this as competitive is because it was slightly competitive in 2020, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as competitive this year because it is Tim Walz's home state. So I think that Kamala Harris is going to win the state fairly easily, and she's going to at least match Joe Biden's numbers where he won the state by 7%, if not do better. So Minnesota is staying in the blue column. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to Texas. So Texas does have a fairly competitive Senate race this year. Colin Allred is running against Ted Cruz. I know Ted Cruz is one of the most fiercely disliked politicians in the country, even amongst Republicans. So Republicans are just kind of weighing the choice. Do I choose a bad Republican over a Democrat? And, I think that race is a toss-up. I'm not going to make a prediction about that Senate race, but I do think that Donald Trump is still going to win Texas, possibly by under 5 points. I think it's possible that Kamala Harris will do better than Joe Biden did, where he won by about 5 points. And the reason why is because I think that Ted Cruz is so unpopular that's going to have an up-ballot effect. So I feel that Kamala Harris will do slightly better than Joe Biden did in that state. So I'm going to go, but it's still going to go for Trump, so it's going to go red right here. And let's see, this is tough right here. So let's go to Maine's 2nd Congressional District. Now, I have seen some competitive polls out of Maine's 2nd. This is the more rural part of Maine. However, Donald Trump won by such a significant margin last time. I think he won by like 9 or 10 percentage points that I just do not see Kamala Harris making up that kind of deficit. So I think Kamala will do better than Joe Biden did, but I still think she's going to lose Maine's congressional district. So that is going to be, again, the sole electoral vote that Donald Trump is going to win in New England. All right, so let's move on to North Carolina. Now, North Carolina is interesting. I think North Carolina is a state that's kind of like fool's gold for the Democratic Party because they always try so hard to win it. They tried really hard in 2016 and 2012. They lost it both times, although they did win it in 2008. So 2008 marks the last time that a Democratic candidate won the state of North Carolina. I'm going to get a drink real quick. Give me a second. Anyways. Even though Democrats have lost the state in every election since 2008, it's always gotten a little bit closer, so much so to the point where I think Joe Biden lost it by under 2 percentage points. And in the case of North Carolina, there's a candidate running for statewide office. He's running for governor. His name is Mark Robinson, the Republican candidate, and he is immensely unpopular, and not just because of his far-right extremist positions, but also because he got into some trouble for making controversial comments online, like back in 2010, where he said that he's a black Nazi, and he also is really into tranny porn, and those are definitely not things you want coming to public light if you're running for public office, especially if you're a Republican with the transgendered porn star stuff. So, he's definitely going to lose. He's behind like 10, 70 points in the polls against his Democratic opponent. But more importantly, I think he's so unpopular that even though there will be some split ticket voting where people vote against Robinson but they vote for Trump, I think there's going to be enough voters who vote against Robinson that they'll also vote against Trump as well, just because they're so disgusted by Robinson that they'll decide that they've just had enough of the Republican Party this year, and it will be enough to give Kamala Harris a slight edge. So I think for the first time since 2008, Kamala Harris will win statewide in the state of North Carolina. So that's going to go for Kamala Harris. However, the good news for Republicans, though, is that I think that she is going to lose the state of Georgia. I mean, there are some potential things that could cause her to win, like if turnout is extremely high in Atlanta, and it does look like turnout is pretty high. But Georgia was, I think, Joe Biden winning Georgia in 2020, he won by the smallest of margins. I think he won by 0.3 percentage points, if not even that, maybe even less than that, if I remember correctly. But I think him winning the state was maybe a bit of a fluke. And I say that because in the subsequent elections, like when Stacey Abrams ran statewide, she got crushed. So I think that was just a bit of a fluke, and the state has returned to its Republican roots. So I think it will be close, but I think that Kamala Harris will lose Georgia anywhere from 1 to 3 percentage points. So I'm going to go ahead and give that to Donald Trump. So since I mentioned like an up ballot effect from very unpopular candidates, let's go ahead and move on to Arizona. So Arizona has trended blue in the last several years. I mean, it elected Kyrsten Sinema in 2018, who later went on to become an independent, and it also has a Democratic governor because Kari Lake ran for governor in 2022, and she lost even though her Democratic opponent, Katie Hobbs, was pretty horrible. She wouldn't even appear in a debate with her. So her winning against Kari Lake was pretty surprising, even though Kari Lake is a very extremist candidate. So Kari Lake is running again statewide, this time for senator, and she's running against Ruben Gallego, who, even though he's a progressive, he's still pretty popular, and he's absolutely trouncing Kari Lake in the polls, and he's going to win pretty easily. So Kari Lake isn't as unpopular in Arizona as Mark Robinson is unpopular in North Carolina, but she is pretty unpopular, and Arizona is a very purple state. It's a very competitive state. So I think what we're going to see is something similar to what I think is going to happen in North Carolina, where Ruben Gallego's popularity and his victory over Kari Lake is going to help Kari have a coattail effect and carry Kamala Harris over the finish line. So I think that Kamala Harris is going to win the state of Arizona. Okay, so the next state I want to move on to is Nevada. Nevada is probably the state I'm the most unsure of, and that's only because even though the state hasn't voted for a Republican since 1996, actually, no, that's not true. They voted Republican in 2000 when George W. Bush ran for the first time, but ever since then, Democrats have narrowly won Nevada in every presidential election. However, I think the state has grown slightly more conservative in the last several elections. I mean, Joe Biden still managed to win it in 2020, but interestingly enough, Nevada was one of the few states where he actually did worse than Hillary Clinton. And also, Nevada did elect a Republican governor in 2022, so the state has grown more conservative. However, I do think that the polls tend to underestimate Democrats in this state. I think previous elections have proven this. So I think Kamala Harris will still win Nevada, but it's going to be by an extremely narrow margin. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in her column. And we have the blue wall over here, but before I get there, I can't forget about the purple dot, or the blue dot, as Democrats hope it will turn out. I'm talking about Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. This district represents Omaha, and Joe Biden did better in this district than a lot of people, I think, expected. In fact, it was kind of a surprise that he won the district because, even Obama couldn't win this district in 2012. However, Joe Biden did better than Obama did in the popular vote in 2012, and I think Kamala Harris will probably do at least as well in this district as Joe Biden did. And also, a lot of the polls have shown, I've seen some polls that show she's 10 points ahead or more. And I know polls aren't everything. I'm not basing this all on polls, but, polls can be wrong. A lot of times they are wrong, but they're usually not so wrong that they make up a double-digit deficit. So I'm going to go ahead and give the blue dot, I screwed up there. I gave Nebraska at large to Kamala Harris there for a second. No, I'm going to go ahead and give the 2nd district to Kamala Harris. The 2nd district will be the blue dot in 2024, just as it was in 2020. Okay, so finally, we're going to be moving to the 3 most competitive states of this election cycle. You need 270 electoral votes to win, and the candidate who wins the plurality of these 3 states, in addition to everything else I mentioned, will be the one who wins the presidential election. So these 3 states, Donald Trump won them in 2016, but then not Kamala Harris, but Joe Biden won them all in 2020. So it's a toss-up at this point. We don't know who's going to win, and they're very heavily being campaigned in. I'm sure there's plenty of television ads being aired there. I mean, I live in Colorado, and we're already getting plenty of television ads and internet ads, so I can only imagine what it's like for residents who are living in these 3 states. So I think I heard recently that Eminem actually campaigned in Michigan, in Detroit, Michigan, with Barack Obama. So there's a lot of star power coming out to just help the candidates over the finish line, and these 3 states are going to determine the winner. So since I mentioned Detroit and Michigan, let's go ahead and start with Michigan. So I think that, of course, this is going to be very close, but I still think Kamala Harris is going to win this state. And the reason why is because Donald Trump got into trouble for basically trashing Detroit. And, I'm sure Detroit is a city that has problems. Everybody agrees with that, but nobody likes to hear their state getting bashed. But I imagine in a state that's as close as Michigan, rhetoric like that isn't helpful. And also, there's the fact that in 2022, there was a gubernatorial election in the state where Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent Democrat, absolutely trounced her Republican opponent by about 12 percentage points. Now, her Republican opponent was a complete nutball, but still, you don't see margins of like 12% in states that are considered like swing states or really close states. So I don't think this state is as competitive as people think it is. So I think this state is going to go for Kamala Harris, and she's going to win. I'm not going to say comfortably, but probably by 2 to 3 percentage points. So about the same as Joe Biden did in 2020. All right, so let's move on to Wisconsin. Now, I think Wisconsin is the most conservative of the 3 competitive Rust Belt states, and I think the election outcomes of 2020 and 2016 prove that. Hillary Clinton lost that by the greatest margin of the 3 Rust Belt states compared to Donald Trump, and respectively, Joe Biden won it by the narrowest of margins of the 3 competitive Rust Belt states compared to Donald Trump in 2020. I think he won it by like 0.6 percentage points. So I think one thing that favors Kamala Harris, though, is that election turnout is very high. I heard that Milwaukee has very high voter turnout, and that's where the lion's share of Democratic votes are in Wisconsin. So I can't think of any election in recent U.S. history where high voter turnout favored the Republican candidate. Like, if you're a Republican candidate, then the last thing you want is high voter turnout. So I think that high voter turnout will carry Kamala Harris over the edge, but I think that she's going to win by less than a percentage point. So Wisconsin will be blue, but just barely. And would you look at that? It looks like Kamala Harris now officially has over 270 electoral votes, and since you just need 270 electoral votes to win, that means I think that Kamala Harris is going to win the 2024 U.S. presidential election. But since we still have Pennsylvania, I think it's important to go over that anyways, because Pennsylvania, it's still an important state, because if she wins Pennsylvania, then that can make up for a deficit in case I'm wrong about one of the states. Like if she loses Arizona and I'm wrong about North Carolina, she loses North Carolina, and then she can make up for that by winning Pennsylvania. So who do I think will win Pennsylvania? Well, Pennsylvania is a pretty interesting state because the demographics are very, very mixed. It's a very purple state. Like on the east, you have Philadelphia, and on the west, you have Pittsburgh, and these are 2 big and highly democratic cities. But in the middle of that, you basically have Alabama. It's very pro-Trump, very rural. So it's anyone's guess who will win the state, and both are campaigning very heavily. However, I think that with the high voter turnout that I've seen, and the fact that Pennsylvania has a very popular Democratic governor named Josh Shapiro, who has been campaigning very heavily for Kamala Harris, and he was even floated as a potential VP pick before Tim Walz was selected. I think those factors will help Kamala Harris win the state of Pennsylvania. Now, I could be wrong, and if Kamala Harris had selected Josh Shapiro instead of Tim Walz, I think she would have had this election. I mean, she would have won Pennsylvania easily. And in fact, I preferred Josh Shapiro over Tim Walz. I mean, I think Tim Walz is a fine individual. I think he's going to be a good vice president, but I think that Josh Shapiro would have been better. So he was my first pick, but I still like Josh Shapiro's role as an attack dog on the campaign trail, and the fact that he's a popular governor in Pennsylvania who easily won re-election, I think is going to help ensure that Kamala Harris doesn't just win the election, but she has the padding to lose a few of the competitive states in the Sun Belt and in the Deep South, like Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona. So that's my prediction, and I am saying it with 100% certainty. I 100% believe that Kamala Harris is going to win the 2024 presidential election. Now, I'm not 100% certain that my map is going to be exactly accurate. I mean, it wasn't 100% accurate last time in 2020, but I was still right that Joe Biden won the election, and I definitely think that Kamala Harris is going to win this election. Now, I'm sure a lot of you people are going to disagree with me, and I welcome discourse in my comment section, of course, but the beautiful thing about this is that we don't have to argue for very long, because the election is very soon. And when the election is over, then what people are saying now isn't really going to matter so much, since we're going to know for certain who won the presidential election early next month. And I'm not going to say it's going to happen on election day. I mean, election day could become election week or even longer, depending on how close the election is. But whatever the case, we're going to find out who won the presidential election very soon, and we're going to find out if I'm right or wrong, but I'm 100% certain that I am right. I mean, of course, there's a very, very small chance that I'm wrong, but I seriously, seriously doubt it. I really believe that Kamala Harris is going to win this election. But whatever your political views may be, and regardless of whether or not you agree with my predictions for this year's presidential election, please just make sure that you go out to vote. Vote early if possible, but if not, then vote on election day. Whatever you do, just make sure that you participate in the majesty of democracy, because voting on election day is a sacred tradition in our country, and it's one of the most American and patriotic things that you can do. All right, I welcome discourse on this subject in the coming weeks, but I will be back with regular content uploads very, very soon. I just had to make this diversion because, like I said at the beginning of this video, it is tradition on this channel. But thank you so much for watching, Hair Loss Witchers. God bless.